At number 10, we have surgery. So check it out. In the field of medicine, Dr. Al-Zawahiri, he got the title of father of surgery. Now, Al-Zawahiri, around the year 1000, he published a 1,500 page illustrated encyclopedia of surgery that was used in Europe as a medical reference for the next 500 years. So he discovered the use of dissolving catgut to stitch wounds beforehand, because a second surgery had to be performed to remove sutures. He also performed the first cesarean operation, and he created the first pair of forceps, and he's said to be the inventor of more than 200 tools used in medicine. His book Al-Tasrif contains information about various medical diseases and treatments and surgical procedures. Al-Tasrif was translated into many different languages like Latin, and it actually served as a complete guide for medical students. Moving on to number 9, we have coffee. This is a very interesting one. So who doesn't love coffee, right? Well, the credit for this invention goes to an Ethiopian herder named Kaldi. More than 1200 years ago, people were struggling to stay awake when a herd of curious goats and their watchful master discovered this life-changing substance. So Kaldi, he noticed that as his goats were grazing on the slopes, they became active and excited after eating a particular berry. Kaldi, he shared his discovery with the abbot of the local monastery, who made a drink with the berries and found that it kept him alert through his long hours of evening prayers also. He shared the discovery with other monks, and then the word spread and coffee was introduced to the world. Next up on our list, we have the camera, which is also linked to a Muslim scientist, Ibn al-Haytham, who revolutionized the field of optics. He rejected the Greek idea that an invisible light emitted from the eye that caused sight, and instead he stated that vision was caused by light reflecting off an object and entering the eye. So he provided proof of his theory by using a dark room with a pinhole on one side, and on the other side there was a white sheet. So light came through a hole and projected an inverted image of the objects outside of the room on the sheet that was on the opposite side. He called this the camera, and it was the world's first camera obscura, which of course now leads to the cameras as we know them today. Number 7 is universities. The first university was founded by a Muslim woman. In the year 859, a young princess named Fatima al-Firhi, she founded the first degree granting university in Fez, Morocco, and her sister Miriam founded an adjacent mosque. Together, the complex became known as the Al-Qawareen Mosque, which soon developed into a place for religious instruction and political discussion. It was named the first university in history and provided education on all types of subjects. Along with astronomy, their students studied the Quran, of course, and theology, as well as law, rhetoric, and writing, logic, arithmetic, geography, medicine, you name it, they were studying it. The crazy thing is, it's still in operation more than 1200 years after, and this is definitely a woman who has inspired women all across the world. Number 6 leads us to the flying machine. You'll definitely be surprised to know that the first person to attempt and succeed in making a flying machine was a Muslim named Abbas ibn Firnas. In the 9th century, he designed a winged apparatus loosely resembling a bird, and his most famous trial took place near Cordoba in Spain, where he flew the machine upward for a few seconds before plummeting to the ground and partially breaking his back. Ouch! Now, 600 years later, his design inspired the famous Italian artist and inventor Leonardo da Vinci to draw up plans of his own flying machine. And then, of course, we know where that led, and now we have airplanes today. Number 5 leads us to the toothbrush. So for the first time, the concept of toothbrushes was introduced by Prophet Muhammad actually. He popularized the use of the first toothbrush around the year 600. Using a twig from the miswak tree, he cleaned his teeth and freshened his breath. Substances similar to miswak are now used in modern toothpaste. Alright guys, at number 4, who likes algebra? Well, yeah, it comes from another Muslim. The word algebra actually comes from the title of a Persian mathematician's famous 9th century treatise, the Kitab al-Jabr wal Muqabbala. And then when you translate that, it translates to the Book of Reasoning and Balancing. Al-Khwarizmi moved away from the Greek concept of mathematics, which was essentially based on geometry, and introduced some new ideas to it. He systemized the Greek and Hindu mathematical knowledge, introduced a method of counting based on numerals and decimal systems for the first time, and used zeros, and introduced the concept of raising a number to a power. So yeah, definitely mathematics, like algebra, very useful to this day, but probably not the most enjoyable subject in school. To me anyways. Now for number 3, let's look at maps. So today we have modern technology that helps us travel to any place we like. Load up our phone, Google Maps is right there. But it was actually Muslims that introduced the concept of map. In the 7th century, Muslims were inspired to leave their homes and travel for trade and for religious reasons to explore the world that, of course, they lived on. And they walked different routes and observed people and places, and they shared their encounters with others when they came back. So first, this was by word of mouth, but with the introduction of paper in Baghdad in the 8th century, the first maps and travel guides were produced. From there, in our number 2 spot is cleanliness and hygiene. So it's not that Muslims invented being clean and being hygienic, no, but they definitely contributed greatly to the field. In the 13th century, the engineer Al-Jazari wrote a book describing mechanical devices, including wudu machines. So these wudu machines provided enough water for ablution, which is the Muslim ritual of washing yourself before prayer and things like that. And also it conserved a lot of water. Muslims came up with the concept of soaps by mixing oil with alkali, which is a salt-like substance that was boiled to achieve the right mix, left to harden, and then used in the bathhouse. Al-Kindi also wrote a book of perfumes called The Book of the Chemistry of Perfume and Distillations. His book contained more than 100 recipes for fragrant oils, salves, as well as aromatic water. The centuries-old perfume making tradition was made possible by Muslim chemists and their distillation methods. They distilled plants and flowers and made perfumes and substances for therapeutic pharmacy. So yeah, we have several contributors there for number 2, but we move on to number 1. We end this episode off with the crank. Muslims have contributed indirectly to modern automatics. The revolutionary crank connecting rod system was first put to use by Muslims. By converting rotary motion to linear motion, the crank enables lifting heavy objects with relative ease. Al-Jazari discovered this technology in the 12th century, and it spread across the globe like wildfire, leading to everything from the bicycle to the internal combustion engine. So let's kick this episode off with number 10, translations. Arab and Persian scholars, they translated text from Greek, Syriac, Sanskrit, as well as Pahlavi into Arabic and Latin, saving those texts from disappearing entirely from the face of the world. Islamic scholars translated medical text from around the known world, and they also added their own observations, thus creating encyclopedias of medical knowledge. Many Islamic medical texts, such as Ibn Sina's Canon of Medicine, as well as Al-Razi's Liber al-Marsorsis, and Al-Zarari's Kitab al-Tasrif. They became central to medical education in European universities for hundreds of years. From there, number 9 leads us to the establishment of hospitals. The Prophet Muhammad had decreed that the sick people and injured people should be cared for and not neglected. The first medical center was established in Persia, which of course now is Iran, and this was back in the 6th century. Baghdad's Audidi Hospital was run by the great Islamic doctor Al-Razi, and Islam gave rise to medical centers, which today would be recognized as hospitals. They had different words for different diseases, as well as outpatient clinics, surgery recovery wards, as well as pharmacies. Now, Baghdad, which was the center of the Islamic Golden Age, had 5 public hospitals by the year 1000, which was a huge achievement because hospitals were not common during that time. Now let's look at the contribution of training of doctors. Islam not only contributed to medicine by establishing medical centers, but also by providing medical training to doctors. Islamic hospitals pioneered the use of antiseptics such as alcohol and vinegar, as well as rose water in cleaning wounds. The Muslim doctors were familiar with the use of opium as an anesthetic during long surgeries and for extracting teeth. They were trained to keep everything completely clean and sanitized, so they had a very high standard of hygiene. From there, let's look at number 7, anatomy and blood circulation. 300 years before William Harvey discovered blood circulation, pulmonary circulation was described by the Arab doctor Ibn al-Nafis. Besides his description of the circulatory system and the heart, al-Nafis, he advocated dissection to learn anatomy and physiology truly, but he wasn't able to perform dissections because of his Muslim beliefs. Al-Nafis, he transferred his knowledge on the brain, as well as the nervous system, bone structure, gallbladder, etc., 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 in his medical encyclopedia Al-Shamil, but not much of his work was translated to Latin and used by medical professionals until much later. The contribution at number 6 is the recognition of diseases. One achievement of Islamic medicine is that it also helped recognize infectious diseases like leprosy, smallpox, and STDs. Now, the great Islamic doctor Ibn Sina, also known as Avicenna, well, he added tuberculosis and described how contagious diseases spread and the necessary methods of quarantine for those diseases. Coming in at number 5, we have contributions to surgery. The Arab doctor al-Zawahiri established the basis of surgery in Al-Andalus in Cordoba, where he worked as a doctor for Caliph al-Hakam II. Al-Zawahiri, he invented over 200 surgical instruments, many of which are still used today, including forceps, scalpels, surgical needles, as well as retractors and catgut sutures. He also wrote the famous Al-Tasrif, which is a 30-volume book of medicine and surgery. He gave a new direction to surgery with his extensive knowledge and discovery of some of the most important surgical instruments. Moving on now to number 4, treating and diagnosing ailments. Ibn Sina, also known as Avicenna, he was known in the West as the Prince of Physicians. His publication Al-Qanan Fi'il Tib, the Canon of Medicine, became a core text for physicians across the Islamic world and Europe, laying out a detailed guide for diagnosing and treating ailments. Ibn Sina, he explained the diagnosis of different diseases from the color, turbidity, as well as the odor of urine. He also created a system of medicine that is called holistic today, in which physical and psychological factors, drugs, as well as diet were combined together to treat patients. Number 3 leads us to pharmacies. Just as the Islamic Golden Era contributed to establishing hospitals during the same time, Islamic pharmacies, known as Saidalas, they were introduced as a part of the Islamic healthcare system. Arab pharmacies were government supervised to ensure the purity and overall quality of the medications, which were weighed on verified scales and, of course, labeled correctly. The knowledge of the Islamic doctors then filtered into Western medieval medicine, and new healing substances were made and used. Now let's look at the contributions to medicines at number 2. Many preparations were drawn from animal, plant, and mineral sources to be used in treating diseases that were described by Al-Kindi in his book Akrabadin. And one major Islamic contribution was treating medicine and pharmacology as separate sciences. A lot of information was established by Islamic doctors on medical herbs, aromatic compounds such as musk, and inorganic medicines. And from there, that leads us to number 1, anesthesia. It is said that Al-Razi was the first doctor to use inhaled medication as anesthesia. The Islamic doctors, they discovered the use of plants and drugs to relieve pain and anesthesia, and they made patients eat, drink, or inhale them to relieve their pain. So we're going to jump right into the video, starting at number 10. Here we have living things formed from water. And the Quran says, "Do those who disbelieve not see that the heavens and the earth were sewn together, and then we unstitched them, and that we made from water every living thing? So will they not then believe?" And that's taken from Surah 21 verses 30. Also in Surah 24 verses 45, it says, "Allah created every living creature from water." Geological studies have confirmed that water is not only the first and the main compound in all living things, but also it precedes the existence of all created beings. Next up at number 9, we have the duality of creation. The Quran specifically says, "And it is He who spread out the earth and set thereon mountains standing firm and flowing rivers, and the fruit of every kind He made in pairs, 2 and 2, male and female. He draws the night as a veil over the day. Behold, verily in these things are signs for those who reflect." This is taken from Surah 13 verses 3. Here we see things created in pairs. Now there's another verse in the Quran that says, "He who has made for you the earth like a carpet spread out, has enabled you to go about therein by roads and channels, and has sent down water from the sky. With it we have produced diverse pairs of plants." And that's taken from Surah 20 verses 53. The Quran has several verses like this. Another one as an example, "Glory be to Him who created all the pairs from what the earth produces, and from themselves, and from things unknown to them." And that's taken from Surah 36 verses 36. Moving on now to number 8, we're going to be looking at the female honeybee. Now check this out. Honeybees have 3 various forms. There's a queen bee, that's the reproductive female. Then there's the drone bee, which is the male. And then the worker bees are the non-reproductive females. Each of these have their role. The non-reproductive female bee is responsible for making the honey. And that's what the Quran speaks about in Surah 16 verses 68 to 69. It says as follows, "Your Lord revealed to the bees, build dwellings in the mountains and the trees, and also in the structures which men erect. Then eat from every kind of fruit and travel the paths of your Lord, which have been made easy for you to follow. From inside them comes a drink of varying colors, containing healing for mankind. There is certainly a sign in that for people who reflect." So in this verse, the verbs build, eat, and travel, they're written in the female form in the original Arabic language. But while we're on the topic of bees and honey, we have to mention at number 7 that honey brings healing. In chapter 16 of the Quran is Surah Al-Nahl, and that is translated as the bees in English. In this chapter, specifically in verse 69, this is what it has to say. "Then eat from all of the fruits and follow the ways of your Lord laid down for you. There emerges from their bellies a drink varying in colors, in which there's healing for people. Indeed, this is a sign for those who reflect." So I pretty much just read that in the previous entry, but research now shows that antibacterial and anti-inflammatory properties are found in honey. It also helps against infections and in the regrowth of tissue when our body is healing. Honey also contains antioxidants that help to prevent heart problems and cancer. Let's talk about gender at number 6. The Quran states that one's masculinity or femininity is actually created out of a drop of sperm that has been ejected. And the Quran says the following: "He has created both sexes, male and female, from a drop of semen which has been ejected." That's taken from Surah 53 verses 45 to 46. And now it's widely known that human sex is determined by the male's sperm, with the female cells playing really no role in the sex determination process. Another miracle mentioned in the Quran is the alaka that clings to the uterus. Now, the following is a passage from the Quran. It says, Then we formed the drop into an alaka and formed the alaka into a lump and formed the lump into bones and clothed the bones in flesh and then brought him into being as another creature. Glory be to Allah, the best of creators. This is taken from Surah 23 verses 14. Now, one thing to note is that the Arabic word alaka is used to describe leeches that cling to a body and feed off of the blood inside of the body. And it can be translated to mean a thing that clings to something. So comparing a leech to an embryo at the alaka stage, we can see that there's similarities between the two of them, not just in appearance, but also in function as well. And the word alaka can also be translated as blood clot. And we can see that the appearance of the embryo and its sacs during the alaka stage actually looks like a blood clot. Number 4 brings us humans formed in stages. Human reproduction, as science tells us, it actually takes place in various different stages. And the Quran also mentions this. In Surah 71, God created you in stages. Also, the Quran says He creates you in the wombs of your mothers in stages, one development after another, in 3 layers of darkness. That's taken from Surah 39 verses 6. Another pretty interesting miracle found in the Quran is about the prefrontal cortex. So check this out. The front part of the brain is called the prefrontal cortex, and it's responsible for coming up with lies. According to PubMed.gov, people who just lie, known as pathological liars, have more prefrontal white matter. And the Quran said that the disbelievers will be dragged from their lying foreheads. In the Quran, Surah 96 verses 15 to 16, we can find a passage that says this, "But no, if he does not desist, he will certainly drag him by the forelock, a lying sinful forelock." Now, this is also translated as forehead. The original Arabic word nasia in this case refers to the frontal lobe of the brain where reasoning is processed, and from there people can come up with lies. Number 2 is also very fascinating. It's talking about bones that are formed before muscles. The first formation of actual bone happens at the jawbone at around 41 days, and then about 3 days later the muscles are formed. And now, we did read the following passage at number 5 in this episode, but there is something else to notice in the passage. Just to recap, it goes as follows. Then we formed the drop into an alaka and formed the alaka into a lump and formed the lump into bones and clothed the bones in flesh and then brought him into being as another creature. Glory be to Allah, the best of creators. So what we can also see in this passage is the sequential formation of bones and flesh. And to end this episode off, we are going to be talking about fasting and its medical benefits. The Quran does mention this in Surah 2 verses 184. It says, "O you who believe, fasting is prescribed for you as it was prescribed for those before you, that you may become righteous, for a specified number of days. But whoever among you is sick or on a journey, then a number of other days. For those who are able, a ransom of feeding a needy person. But whoever volunteers goodness, it is better for him. But to fast is best for you, if you only knew." Nowadays, we know that intermittent fasting has been linked to numerous health benefits. And some of those benefits include reducing the risk of diabetes, reducing inflammation in the body, as well as lowering your blood pressure and also balancing your weight. It, however, is recommended that you consult with a medical professional when it comes to fasting, but studies do show that yes, fasting does have many benefits.